Hi, my name is Robert Kolchman, as you can see in the thing there. I am the representative of the project for the Museum of LGBTQ Culture and History.
Put the Q in now.
Yes, we put the Q in as of the other day, just for you, Don.
Okay.
So I guess we'll go down and let everyone do introductions. I guess we can start with Don Tuscon. You can say what you're here for and what you represent.
Okay, then I'll change my background so you know what I represent there. Let's see how that works. There. Okay. Well, I'm Don Texan. I am currently in Port Alberni, British Columbia, Vancouver Island, the most beautiful province in Canada, British Columbia. I am the host and creator of a show called Queer View Mirror, which is a show about queer people, by queer people, for queer people, and our allies. It's aired on Shaw Cable TV in 10 or 12 areas so far, and we're just a few steps away from going national. And I ran into Robert, and it seems we have the same message and the same things to share, so I thought he would be a formidable ally in pursuing the Queer View Mirror mission, which is to showcase our diversity, authenticity, and creativity in the beautiful LGBTQ community. And thank you, Robert, for putting in the queue finally.
Hey, thank you very much.
Formerly, I know it was only LGBT.
Yes, we had to get through all the logisticals, and some people were still on the fence about putting the queue, but when they named me director out of all the teams, I was able to just say, put the queue in. I guess next we'll go to Miss Monica Helms.
Hello, my name is Monica Helms, as he just said, and I am the creator of the transgender pride flag, which you see behind me. I also have done many other things, including created the Transgender American Veterans Association with a friend of mine, Angela Brightfeather, and several other things, but I won't go into them now.
Marshall?
Hi, my name is Marshall Shore, and I am the project manager for the Arizona LGBT plus history project. When people think of kind of that queer history, they typically think of New York, San Francisco, LA. And starting to kind of work on this project when a local bar was demolished, we realized that our history was quickly disappearing right before our eyes. And so really brought this project to fruition to help kind of look through a new lens and gather that history and discover our own history, which has been a very exciting project. Arizona is full of LGBTQ history. And so it's been kind of fun digging into that and finding more and more almost daily.
I'm muted. I'm getting clout.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction, Marshall. Just an added note, Marshall has recently been added as one of the council members or leadership members of the museum project. So he's going to be a little ahead of most of you as he helps me and some of the other council members with the questions we're going to be going over today. I guess would be the person enabled admin. I don't believe we've formally met before.
Oh,
Hi. Indeed, Millie. Come on, introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Millie Carter Bloodworth, and I am coined the transgender trailblazer. I moved to Arizona in 1973, right after my surgery, and my life began to blossom and change for the better. I am here because all of the things that you're talking about today, I am a retired special needs counselor. And yet I'm still doing the work today thinking, oh my God, this will never end. I am honored to be in your presence and continue the conversation. Let's continue to make a difference.
Well, thank you very much. We're absolutely delighted to have you here. And that's a very important topic that we'll have to be adding into the museum as we go on. We haven't had much chance to talk about the overlap with the special needs community, though. I and some of the other administrators have worked heavily in that. I guess last but not least, certainly, would be Vaush.
Hey there. Delighted to be here in the company of such an illustrious cast. My goodness. My credentials aren't as impressive as those the people here. I'm a live streamer and a YouTuber, a progressive and a pansexual myself. I frequently speak on topics pertaining to the LGBTQ community. I'm delighted to be here. I've been familiar, or at least aware of, this project for some time, and I'm just very happy to have the opportunity to speak amongst you.
All right. Well, now that introductions are out of the way, I guess for any audience currently listening, we can all go over the basis of the project. As formally stated, this is a museum project. So it's going to be located in Northern Virginia near the DC area, and it's going to take foot from its siblings, such as the African American Museum, the Holocaust Museum, and the Bible Museum. I'm sure everyone's familiar with the various Smithsonian and private museums. We've spent the last few years working on the design. As you can imagine, it's pretty complicated given there are currently 20 to 23 active flags in use, along with overlapping terms and terms that are no longer in use. Over the last 3 to 4 years, we figured out the best way to break it down, which would be breaking it into floors on gender and floors on sexuality, while still giving each flag their own hall, which is what we're calling the larger exhibit, since a hall for a flag will have multiple exhibits located in and of itself. This is kind of just introductions. So what we're going to be doing right now is this is our very first public talk. I was just going to go down with some questions that some people have given us and we've gone over just to get everyone's general thought. It's going to be more of a town hall style format, so everyone can give their answer. And then if there's a discussion, we can have the discussion followed by the ending of the next question. The first few are pretty general, straightforward, so there probably won't be too much discussion to be had, but some of the later ones definitely are more complex and bring up some nuances, as we've experienced with Dawn and the reclamation of the word queer. So if that sounds good with everyone, I guess we can get started and go down the questions. Everyone good?
Yes, very much so. Thank you.
All right, cool. Well, so the first question is pretty straightforward, and I guess I'd like to hear everyone's take on what LGBTQ history is to them specifically. A lot of people have a different focus that they like to talk about mainly. I guess we can start with Marshall.
For me, LGBTQ history really is those stories of people from eons ago and allowing them to have presence, their stories to be told, whether they are with us or not. As terms change, I know a project that I've talked with Monica about was a gender pioneer from 1906, a Russian gentleman who passed away here in Phoenix without a headstone, and actually come to find out it is the first, a guy has written a book about it, and it is the first book on a trans person in Russian. And so when he passed away here, and so even though those terms did not exist then, he was living his authentic life as a man, to the point where he actually had, he had one wife, got divorced, had another wife. And so it's really trying to allow for those stories to be told regardless of terminology changes, allowing those stories to just help document and create a path for all of us to see that we indeed are not a new thing, that we have been around forever. When you look at the term two-spirit, it's a new term for a philosophy that is centuries old.
Okay, great. And I guess we'll go on to Monica next.
Yes, well, my focus has been on trans history, but specifically military
I'm muted. I can't
trans
believe
history.
they made the flag. What the
People
fuck?
that served in the military that would be considered trans today, or those people that are gender nonconforming. A lot of women served in wars to either fight right alongside their husbands or fight because they wanted to fight and they couldn't as women. So they went in as men. And there are a few that actually continued living as men past the war that we were in. So I also am familiar with a lot of the 20th century trans people that have served in the military. Many men who later transitioned to their true selves. And like myself, I served 8 years in the Navy, served on 2 submarines, and I transitioned later in life. So there's many like that. Their stories are wonderful to think about. But I like the idea that, the gay and lesbian people were able to serve openly in the military. And then finally we came along afterwards, 5 years later. So there's a lot of history, everybody together, but I'm very glad to help people. If anything, if I can't find it, I know somebody will know who will know it. So thank you.
Definitely a great take, and already we're seeing multiple differences in the aspects as it's a massive community. I'm going to formally apologize because I'm really bad with names. So unless I hear a name twice, like I won't remember it. So Adnan, could you please repeat your name again for me? And I promise I'll remember it for the rest of the stream.
Of course, are you talking to who?
I'm talking
Melly, that
to
is you.
Melly. It's pronounced Melly?
Millie.
Millie. Okay. All right.
Yes.
Millie. Thank you. I have a neurodivergency, so names are particularly hard to remember unless I hear it twice. You can go up next, and then we'll go on to Dawn and then Vaush, and that's the order it's laid out on my computer.
Thank you. I hate Zooming. I've always done this in the doctor's office, in the teacher's office for the past 40 years. Special needs, looking at it. Thank you, thank you. I am on the fence. I am a product of the 60s and watched it change. I was also early on in my life pushed in a part of segregation where Black students were bused. I am also a part of my life where my grandfather looked like this panel and had jungle fever and raised my grandmother and all of the children in my family. So when I look at trans in the 60s, it was something to be excited of and lived to express your sex. Rudy Gernrich came out with the topless bathing suit, and I was 2 years on hormones, but I was still hanging. And I went to the beach thinking, eating the beach out, but never thinking that I was going to be arrested because I was a boy. And when the police took me away and said, oh my God, the dude looks like a lady, that made me feel good. So when I look at growing up, I had to hide. I couldn't be open and let others know that here I am. I had to have a job. And I didn't want to be a whore. I wanted other things in life. I am glad that we're having this conversation in the next generation of LGBTQ. They didn't have that. I'm a product of the Benjamin and money. You could not straddle the fence in the 70s. I've had drop dead gorgeous girls that have committed this and have taken their lives because that mind did not match that vagina that they had put in. So I am still sad and excited about the life that I have lived and had the opportunity to live it and meet others like me and others not like me, because there was a fence already drawn in my life saying, you're not good enough. I had to prove myself to be good enough to be invited at the table. That's where I am. And I see it changing because today there are 7 LGBTQ students on campus. And there is still not enough information out there about us, but they have a degree. That's where I am. I've lived it and I've seen it.
Thank you very much for that. Definitely, education is a huge focus. And one thing about museums is they allow educators to take their students and explore a little bit more. Our next stream later next month actually is going to be with a bunch of professors from various universities in Pennsylvania and on the Eastern Coast. But Dawn, I guess you're up.
So the question was, what's my take or my view on LGBTQ history?
Yeah, it was, pretty much. Like,
Okay.
Well, what is it and its importance?
Well, I'll be the first to admit I don't know much about LGBTQ history because I grew up in the Philippines and there's no such thing as, all I know so far is the Stonewall thing, which was in 1960 something, 69, I think. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I grew up in the Philippines and there's no such thing as LGBTQ communities. There's only, gay people who are supposed to be hairdressers, fashion designers, or makeup artists. That's the way it is in the Philippines. And because of that, I came out very late. And so now I'm more or less coming in as a catch-up student. I have lots of time to make up for. So I'm just so glad I'm involved with you guys because I do need the education and I could really learn from the information and experiences that you have to share. So there's not much I can say about LGBTQ history per se because I'm just getting started on it. And I'm glad I am finally after coming out at the age of 51. So I am a late bloomer and a late person who came out. So, and I have a lot of catching up to do. That's where I'm coming from.
That's definitely a good take because we're going to find so many people who are, have been experienced, who have not experienced everything. And plus, just with the different flags, everyone's going to be learning together from multiple different areas. But that's a later question. So I guess, Vaush, you're up.
Yeah. Back a couple hundred years ago, the Catholic Church persecuted people who were left-handed. People who were left-handed were thought to be servants of the devil. They were taught that prayer and, chasteness could make them right-handed. Some people argued that it was a personal choice. There was some idolatry going on. And of course, nowadays, this looks and sounds ridiculous. Nobody today, I mean, maybe some people, but the vast majority of people today would hear of that bias against left-handed people and think, that is absurd. We don't do that anymore. We don't have any ridiculous, arbitrary, unjustified prejudices against people anymore. But I think 100 years from now, we're going to see the way we treat LGBT people today pretty much the exact same way. It's ridiculous. And one of the biggest frustrations that I have with the way the LGBT community is treated broadly is the idea that this is some sort of modern, frivolous thing. It's like these teenagers, and the college students. That today is every bit as ridiculous as a Catholic priest in 1482 saying that this left-handedness thing is some newfangled fad, a product of fatherlessness or of, straying from the light of God. It's ridiculous. We have these prejudices and these presumptions that the life we live is supposed to be a certain way, and we're taught that through media. If you take a look at the television, the movies that existed back in the 1950s and 40s, you wouldn't have even believed gay people could exist. It would, conceptually, you wouldn't have even imagined. The only time you would have heard of their existence would have been the seedy stories of some relative nobody talked about anymore. It was all kept in the back end, maybe whispers you'd hear of a friend who you lost contact with after high school. But in reality, they've always been there. Trans people have always been there. They've taken different names over time, certainly. We've always had different ways of describing these concepts, but the underlying idea is every bit as permanent and as natural as left-handedness, and our discrimination against it is every bit as arbitrary as the Catholic Church's was. So I just think that's dumb. And I think that we should probably work to mediate that. Because much in the same way that anyone now would look at, let's say we imagine some country where people still discriminate against the left-handed. Let's say, I don't know, Florida. They still do it there. I don't know. If we looked at that from an outside perspective, we would think that was ridiculous, medieval. But we do it today, so maybe we should adjust our standards of what we consider medieval. And I think that that's happening now. There are many young people, especially, who are much more progressive on these issues than I ever could have imagined just 10 years ago. But there's still plenty of work to be done. And that is what LGBTQ history and rights means to me, the work that's being done.
Yeah, I think that's a great take because as some of the younger people viewing will have seen, there's that common notation going around social media stating, oh, there are more trans people now or more gay people than there have been. It's a new thing. And no, it's not new. They just feel safe. Same with people who have mental health issues or who have mental disabilities or have physical disabilities or as Millie would be able to talk about, special needs. I have a sibling which multiple severe disabilities, and how many years ago would they just not have been really grouped in? Our next question is the last kind of just opener question. After that, we really get into stuff where we can more so have a discussion amongst ourselves. But this one's kind of like, it's a two-parter really, but you can answer it in one answer. So how well do you think that the LGBTQ history or queer history, how well do you think it's taught in the current education, just in education or in general society? And how well do you think that the community handles its own diversity amongst itself? So all the flags being taught, just conflicts between the different like gays and transgenders or bisexuals, the huge biphobia that exists. I guess we'll start with Marshall and we'll go in the same order.
So, I think the one thing is when you look at different grade levels, what is taught. I can remember when there was all kinds of fervor over a book called Heather Has Two Mommies when that book came out from Allison Publishing. Up to where you now can study in college queer theory, queer history, but a lot of work needs to still be done on actually identifying those folks that fall under that umbrella of who are those LGBT folks that may not, again, have had those terminologies. Mm-hmm. The fact that you've got with Monica talking about how the military, basic World War II ending and Stonewall happening in the late 60s was not a coincidence. Mm-hmm. There's a very strong tie to that. And that's not readily made. And so when I think that, as we move forward with LGBTQ studies, trying to ask more questions, identify more people, situations where language doesn't exist, or now trying to come up with terms to explain or describe folks that are no longer around, but still allowing their voices to be heard. Because, none of us got here all on our own. We are all on the shoulders of so many people that have come before us.
Yes.
And I think, and that's the important piece, is really allowing for those prior folks that have helped us that we may not even know their story, but now trying to give them some amount of respect that they do deserve.
All right. Monica, you're next.
Could you repeat the question just to make sure I got exactly what you're looking for?
Yes, ma'am. So the question basically is, how well do you think queer just history or culture in general is taught in the education system, be it in actual education or in society? And how well do you think the LGBTQ community handles its own diversity? So like just between, gay people and transgender people and bisexual people, stuff like that.
Well, I have to say that I live in Georgia, so I see a lot of discrimination to LGBTQ people, and of course, this lately, there every single state seems to be wanting to put out some kind of a anti-trans bill of some kind. Arkansas passed theirs and their governor signed them, and Texas will probably soon pass theirs. But a few states like North Dakota, and Utah, the governor vetoed some of these bills. So they're not going. So the part of the reason is, being in the South, don't expect to see much in the way of LGBTQ experiences being taught in school. Maybe in colleges, but definitely not in high school or grade school. They around here feel that it's a terrible thing to be talking about gay people. You don't want to talk about gay people in Georgia. So, I had to put up with that. I left Arizona. Wasn't that much better. So glad that Marshall is there and Millie's there. She makes sure everybody's getting things taken care of. But I think that once this anti-trans youth trend seems to die, and it will die, and a lot of the laws will get overturned, and there'll be federal laws that will come in, and this is where our education begins. We're going to have a lot of people that are going to still want to hate us for whatever reason, because they think we're against the Bible, but they just don't seem to get it. So we have to fight in different levels. I know that didn't Arizona governor just vetoed an anti-trans bill? Yeah, I thought so. A lot of my friends were real happy there, and I could see you guys are happy about it too. But I think that we will be slowly getting more and more education in the future. And as far as the diversity amongst LGBTQ people, there's still a bit of anti-trans with some gay people. We see that, and then of course you got the TERFs that are trying to tell trans people shouldn't exist. But I heard that those of us in the South, we all started getting our whatever together at the same time. Whereas I understand that people like in New York, the gay people really took over, and it was harder for trans people to be involved, and they were left out for the longest time. So it's going to take time. I think that we have to, if we set an example on accepting other people within our communities. Here in Georgia, we have a lot of things against the trans women of color. They unfortunately are being murdered at a high rate still. So we have to work together. That's just the thing. And I'm glad to be here with you guys, plural, and thank you very much for including me.
Hey, well, thank you for being here. And definitely, like you said, there is a little discrepancy, and we'll get past it, but hopefully we get past it a little bit quicker, especially with what happened to that poor 10-year-old, everyone yelling at them. But no, definitely. I guess, Millie?
Yes, I am coming a different way. I grew up in the 60s, and it was the Jewel Box Review. The Jewel Box Review had beautiful drag queens and drag kings, and that set a preference for me. And being that I was a part of that, and yet not thinking of myself as being gay, because if you're a drag queen, the gay boys sort of push you away and say, oh, your neurosis is just too much, Millie. I can't understand. You want to be a woman. So transgender did not really catch on until RuPaul got out there and said, look at me. And now that RuPaul has made an impact and drag has been here since the beginning of time, it took that creativity and that zest in order to make drag queens a market. My brother was one of them, Miss Ebony. He came and we brought diversity to Arizona. And the reason is because my white grandfather had jungle fever. And he would tell his grandbabies, if I can love Donia and Solomon can love Sheba, that was a good match. And I took that to heart as a child because he had blue-green eyes and gray hair, and Sonia had nappy brown hair. So I looked at that and said, oh, here is heaven. That man went to bed every night with that woman. My biological father did not do that with my biological mommy. So I thought, oh, this is the way for me. If I'm going to find a partner, it will be a partner not of my color. Only because it's what a child learns. I was a product of that. This man brought prestige. He made us live in the big house. We was called the uppity N-word. He provided jobs and gave dignity to Blacks as maids and portlets on the Chicago, Illinois Central Railroad. So therefore, I look at this and say, it's the human condition. We have issues. Some of them are good and some are not bad. And I deal with it. I am an old woman that have kissed the demons himself and not HIV free. And there's girlfriends that have done these things and they're gone. So I am blessed to have this conversation with all of you. Thank you for including me and being a part of this. And if there's anything more that I can do, Monica, I haven't seen you since we were at the state fair. And here we are.
Oh,
Hopefully
we'll be able to. Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. That actually, it means a lot. And hopefully we'll be able to get back to state fairs and actual events sooner. But in the meantime, I think, Dawn, you'll be able to bring probably a very interesting perspective to this question, given you didn't have much of the interaction. So it was probably a huge culture shock.
Well, fortunate for me, I am in the presence of Canadians who are here with me. So I have a little bit of an audience. And they're not young, but they're not old either. So as you were talking, I said, I feel like the odd man out. I'm the only Canadian who's not even a Canadian. I'm an Asian. I've only been in Canada for 2006. So I threw the question to them about as far as education is concerned and what strides Canada has done. So as far as I know from Michael, he says there is such a thing in Canada called SOGI, S-O-G-I, built into the curriculum of the schools, elementary schools and high schools, like throughout the whole education system in Canada or in just British Columbia?
Well, it's in most provinces to some degree. It varies.
Okay, so SOGI means sexual orientation, gender identification, where children in schools are educated towards the idea of acceptance and respect, not just tolerance, because that's my stand. I'm not here to be tolerated. I'm here to be respected and in some ways adulated and celebrated, because we bring color to everybody everywhere. That's my stand.
Oh,
That's why we have the rainbow in our flag, because we bring the color to this black and white, dreary, boring world. Anyway, as far as the education of LGBTQ is concerned, I think Canada is, dare I say, a bit ahead of the US when it comes to all this stuff. Like we have gay marriage here. It's already undisputed. You can get married. Same-sex marriage is accepted anywhere in Canada, not just in some states of the US, as I understand. So as far as LGBTQ acceptance, tolerance, education, I think I have come to the right place. I have come to the right country. From the Philippines to Canada, and yeah, I said, when my family first thought of migrating to Canada in 1987, I said, I can't, because I was at a point where I did not accept that I was gay. I played being straight so well that I deserve a Lifetime Achievement Award. I was married to one woman for 26 years, and I have 3 sons, all adults now. And they already know about their father being gay since 2014. Like I came out late. And I even went the extra mile proving I was so straight. I was a high-profile pastor minister in the Philippines with a live television show that ran on Channel 7, one of the major TV stations in the Philippines. It was called Turn On to Jesus. So to thousands of people in the Philippines, I was known as Pastor Don Texan from the show Turn On to Jesus. And I did not preach against my community, of course. I always preach that God is love and he accepts everybody. But my other colleagues in the ministry, of course, always preached about Sodom and Gomorrah and fire and brimstone and the judgment coming upon the perverts and the homosexuals and blah, blah, blah. But that was written in Romans chapter 1 by the Apostle Paul, who is very strongly rumored to be gay himself. But anyway, that's for the Catholics to resolve. As far as their dogma is concerned.
Growing up, going to a private Catholic school, they tried to resolve that as best they could. But no, we'll definitely, we've got to work on adding that. I mean, our education system's pretty much, and Vaush, you can correct me if I'm wrong, you're more familiar with this than I am, but I'm pretty sure it's related just to university level, with some, like, high schools mainly have clubs, and right now, as we see with all the states, anything lower than that, they're just like, why do they need to know?
Mm-hmm. Well, according to my friend Michael here, there was a Christian university that prescribed or required somebody to be Christian before you could enroll in their university.
Well, if they're private, they can do that.
Oh, they even had to sign a document to apply to that university that they will not have sexual relationships outside of marriage. So, you know, that whole standard, straight, you know, two-faced moral code.
Like anyway. the rings we had. Anyway,
they lost their license. That's how strong Canada is here. They lost their license.
Well, I'll let Vaush take it away now, and he's on the opposite coast as me, so we can probably give maybe correct some information if I gave anything wrong.
No, you're completely correct, especially with lower education up until college. I think that basically anything other than heterosexuality is basically considered to be a sexual topic. Like, it's inappropriate to teach kids about it, you know? Heterosexuality is either assumed or it's referred to as a matter of biological course. It's physiology, you know, chromosomes and what have you, which is very sterilized, very medicalized. But any mention of homosexuality or what have you, it's usually treated as more of like a flourish or a lifestyle choice. At least that's the way it's kind of treated implicitly in the way people talk about it. And for that reason, it's considered frivolous and inappropriate for children. Now, the college experience that I had was very LGBT friendly. I think it was about as friendly as you're going to get. I think that the college experience I had was pretty much a model of what good LGBT positive experiences should be for people. But man, just even back like 10, 15 years ago in middle and high school, these topics are spoken with such hushed tones. Such a, you know, it's everything is covered in the shroud of conceit and mystery. I don't even remember how old I was when I first realized what bisexuality was. And it took even longer for me to realize what transgender meant, or because, you know, we hear these terms early, but usually it's in a negative connotation. Like, here's a way a person can be deviant. The totality of the idea is usually not made evident. Sometimes people forever, sometimes they never know. At the very least until you're older. When it comes to the organization of the current sort of, I guess, queer pride movement, I think that things are looking very positively right now. There are efforts to divide the L's from the B's to the G's to the T's. You know, there are attempts to separate people, but they're usually done by conservatives. A very common conservative tactic is to say, well, okay, lesbians, gays, and bisexuals, I'm fine with you. Sure, great. But trans people, why are you hitching your movement to those types? But this is usually done disingenuously because the people who make those arguments are also anti-gay, anti-lesbian. What they're trying to do is divide and conquer, and people are falling for it less and less than they ever have before. You know, Stonewall is a lesson in this, of course. Trans people were some of the first and most active agents for change in this country with regards to LGBTQ rights, and then they got thrown under the bus for about 40 years because the beneficiaries of those activities were predominantly gay and lesbian, well, predominantly white gay and lesbian people. And it was easier optically for them to sort of distance themselves from the consequences of their own actions. But we're getting better about this. Right now, there are Black Lives Matter rallies where people are throwing around that flag. You know the one. It has the trans colors. It's got everything. It's the everything flag. You know what I mean? The bi POC trans positive flag. And I think the popularity of that flag, even though, and I admit to my bias here, I think it's a bit busy design-wise. The popularity of that flag is really heartening to me because I think we're finally converging on what should be what we began with, the ultimate intersectional approach. You're holistically progressive. If you're for one thing, you're for everything. You all stand together. Because if you let conservatives or reactionaries take any little bit of your advocacy movement, they'll use that as a wedge to drive people further apart the next time these topics come up. So you never relent on anything. Never relent on the child trans healthcare. Never relent on the bathroom accessibility. Never relent on BLM. Don't relent on any of the issues because weakness on one side of the progressive front is weakness for every progressive. You just keep pushing forward. And so far, we're winning. The stats pan that out. Every single time a poll is taken, general acceptance of gay marriage, of trans people, what have you, it goes up. Not just here in America, but elsewhere around the world too. Argentina and Spain both have really, really solid public perceptions of trans people, for example. This is a worldwide movement. And while I can't say that we're incapable of losing, I think the odds are very much in our favor at this point.
Yes. No, definitely. And like you said, the divide and conquer, as we saw with the original appearance of Western separation bathrooms, was to try and keep, it was an anti-feminist thing, trying to keep women more in the house. And then with the voting in the US, where recently they voted against the trans rights bill on the West Coast, saying, I forget which state, but it was saying, oh, we need to protect women's rights. And then they had the Women Inclusion Act, which they also voted against literally the next week. And going off on like history, no, definitely. One thing I wanted to say off of what Vaush said was in schools in America, it's kind of taught that it's the default to be cis and straight is the default. And this is something I see before this. I worked in Hollywood back prior to COVID when that was a thing. And I'd work on small, web series. And I'd noticed a lot of writers and a lot of people, every time they change someone ancient, like with the one character from Star Wars. He's the Han Solo's friend. Why am I blanking on this?
Chewbacca?
Did anyone? No. The one who had the Falcon prior to Han.
The really cool guy.
Yeah, like the really like the player guy, Lando Calrissian. Yes. Yeah. They recently announced he's pan. He doesn't care. He goes into a bar. It's like Woodstock. He has fun with it. And the actor who played him came out and said, yeah, we acted him like a dude who just does whatever. It's a guy, it's a girl. He wins a mining or a hotel one day and sells it the next day. And a lot of the fans freaked out as to like, oh, this is some woke push forward. You can't change a character. And I'm like, this is a character who we don't know their sexuality. We've never seen them in a relationship other than a one-night stand. We don't know literally anything about them. This would be no different than if Malfoy's Goonies, Oil and whatever the one was, came out and suddenly one of them was trans, one of them was gay, and it just happened, and that came out later. And they go, well, yeah, but we already know they're straight. And it's like, do we? It's treated as kind of the default, and that's something that we definitely, as we go more into theory in university and those people get out and start teaching, we'll slowly start to see that change more in the US too. Don, did you have a question? I saw you raise your hand there.
Yeah, I'm just curious about Vaush has the best audio. So what mic are you using? I'm just curious.
It's an AT-AT40 Audio Technica, and thank you. It's just a product of the industry. Can I add one quick thing, by the way?
Yeah, go ahead.
I also think it's important to point out that the arguments reactionaries have been using against trans people today are the same ones they were using against gay people 10 years ago. The trans bathroom bill thing, we don't want trans women in our women's bath. This is identical to arguments that were made against gay men in men's locker rooms, or anything to that effect. And those arguments were the same as arguments made 50 years ago because white women didn't want black women in their changing rooms and bathrooms. So it's the same.
Many forms, many areas, right?
Yeah, it's the same. We just keep fighting against the exact same argument over and over. But they're running out of excuses, really. The advent of the internet, modern technology, people are getting more and more familiar with these arguments. We aren't as susceptible to the generational cycle as we were before. We can familiarize ourselves with history much easier. So it's a losing bid. I mean, they're running out of gas.
The argument is also less valid as time goes on, because like the argument, we don't want trans people in the bathroom for the safety of women. No guy is going to go on 2 years of this, hormone or this societal changing or this public changing just to go in and be pervy. If he's going to do it, he's going to break the law and do it anyway, because either way it's illegal. Like with gay people, you'd have to make the argument that gay people don't find you attractive because you're just afraid. You don't want gay people doing to you what you do to women, and gay people don't find you attractive in the first place. And like as it goes on and it gets into these more nuanced territory, from same-sex people of different race to people of different orientation to trans people, it becomes harder and harder to hold that same argument. But
the next one, it's going to be like 20, 30 years from now, it's going to be like we don't want ghosts inhabiting the same restroom. There's going to be whatever comes next, and they're going to make the same argument. And I don't know if I don't know if I'll be on the pro ghost.
From another planet.
Yeah, exactly. Do we want to share our restrooms with extraterrestrials, robots, and the ghosts? I don't know. I don't know where I'm going to sit on that side of the aisle. Maybe I'll be a robophobe.
It's cute, fine.
Yeah,
but assuming they're not already here.
Oh, and
robots take over.
By the way, Lando's girlfriend was a robot.
That looks like I'm already behind the times then.
Yeah, no, because they updated it. They had them have that relation, that unconfirmed relation with the robot that became literally the Falcon, because they uploaded the AI.
Oh,
what's the robot?
Behind
the robot was what? Bi or pan?
We don't know. All we know is it had a female voice. No, the next
binary.
One, I think I'm going to mix two questions here, because this one's just kind of, with the way our conversations are going, it works a little bit closer. This was something that Marshall was definitely concerned about a little bit. And given that we have so many people here from just different generationals and different stories in history, how do you think that the museum or education in general can bridge the generation gap between the community? And do you see any problems with intersectionality in the community, be it from age, experience, or anything? I guess we'll start with Marshall again.
I think when you look at our history, you do have, and kind of, I think by some people's view, it's kind of a negative thing, is the fact that we lost at least 1-2 generations of LGBTQ folks to HIV/AIDS. I mean, growing up in a small Indiana town, pretty much not many survivors from that entire community of friends. I'm one of, as far as I know, 2 out of a whole crowd. Those voices have been lost, and they ranged across the spectrum of people. And I've also heard from younger folks about, well, why do you keep bringing up that doom and despair of HIV/AIDS? Because now it's a manageable, livable disease. But again, that is part of our history. And views of things can easily change. We now have gay marriage that is legalized. But not everyone, I mean, my partner and I have been together 27 plus years together. We are still not married, and allowing for those differences. of we don't need a piece of paper to say, hey, you know, you've got a relationship. And I think everyone has a valid voice, whether I've talked to folks who are freshmen in college who have a cohort of trans young men that run around. And I'm like, you know, I really would love it if you would pull out your phone once a week and just do like a video diary of what you're doing, where you're going, what cafes are you going to, what classes are you taking, what are kind of the issues. I was like, you know, it may mean nothing now, but in 20 years, looking back and reflecting on those teenage years, I mean, I can't imagine in college having a group of trans men to hang around with. And I think those differences in how communities view things evolve over time, but I really think the museum can really kind of allow that intergenerational. I know it's like with Millie, we've done some storytelling things, and I think that's a great way to get people to start sharing those intergenerational stories so that we start to capture what was it like back in the day versus what is it like now. It may not be the easiest now, but we've all overcome hurdles, and that's the commonality, is coming over hurdles. And so sharing those and getting us all to realize, you know, whatever those hurdles are, we're all here to support you as you climb over those.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a great opening start and a great take on the definition as well. Obviously, that was your question, so you'd be prepared. I guess, Monica, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I liked what the Smithsonian did when they accepted my flag. They just not only got the flag, they wanted to know everything about my history. They wanted to know, you know, when they found out I was in the military, they wanted to know all my military stuff and everything that I did, a history of my children and they wanted to know the whole story. And so it's just not just, hey, we have this item. We want to know where it started, where it came from, what was the inspiration, what was everything. This is a model that I think this museum should use, is to go into the history of the very people that have created these various flags. Find out as much about them as possible. Where did they go to school? Where did they, you know, did they get married? Do they have kids? Did they serve in the military? Did it, whatever, you know? And I liked the fact that if they ever put it on display, because they don't have an LGBTQ wing yet, but if they ever put it on display, they're going to have other things in my life that are going to be on display with it, including several things from my submarine days. So I think that if we're going to get the flag, I would hope that we can get as much other information and paraphernalia, if you want to call it, items from that very person who created it. So that way we're adding to the story. We're giving a lot of story to this very item. It's not just the bi flag. It's the bisexual flag created by Michael Page in 1998, and Michael was part of the BiNet USA, and these are various things that I know about just him. And I'm sure that we can, you know, if we know who made these various flags, who's the original creator, then we need to know those stories, which adds to the color of our community. It adds to, wow, this person did this. This person realized that they were pansexual, and so they decided to do this. You know, this was their inspiration. So I want to know as much about the person behind the flag as I want to know about the flag itself.
I'm just going to hold you right there for a second because Dom was letting us know in chat that he has to go take care of something else. So I just wanted to say goodbye to Don, and thank you for being on and coming on the show and being a part of this.
Bye, Don. Maybe we could talk later, Don.
Okay. Yes. We'll catch up. Okay.
All right.
Bye.
And then I wanted to cut in there for a second, Monica, and just say something. So earlier, Monica mentioned to me the importance of intersectionality and just in flags themselves within their communities, as multiple people have made variants of the transgender flags. Hers was just the one that took off. With polyamorous, most people use the polysexual flag, which if I remember correctly, I think it's pink, green, and there's one other color. But there is a polysexual sexuality, polyamory. There's a flag for that too, which was blue, red, and black, and had a yellow pie symbol. Everyone hated it. It looks terrible. It just looked like a conservative LARPing, like USSR type thing. And they tried to remake it, and 7 people remade it. And ultimately, they just said the best one was the first one. We're going to go back to that. And as a result, most people popularly use the pink, green, and it was the other color. It's either yellow or blue. There are too many flags for me to remember off the top of my head. I'm sorry, guys. But that's definitely something important is you got to look at each flag, because this example is really well done with the polyamory flag, where each flag tells a different story as to why it was made that way. Monica and I had a long discussion on just some of the different trans flags and how each one tells a story. There's reasoning behind the design, why they designed it like that.
And I think that kind of story will add a lot of information that people will want to see. You just don't go to a museum and see, oh, there's the skull of Lucy, the first human. But you get the story about them finding Lucy and why she was named Lucy. The song Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds was played when they discovered it. So that's why she was named Lucy. So, the Smithsonian was real good at getting as much as they could on my original flag and me. And I think that this is a goal that we should go for on this museum.
Right.
These flags don't just exist. They exist because people wanted them to exist. They had a dream. They had decided this was what it is. And so we want to hear from them as much as we can.
And just to clarify for Vaush, I remember this a second ago. You said earlier about the newer Pride flag. It's been, there were 5 iterations. There was the first one, which had 8 stripes, was it, or 6 stripes?
Yep.
And then they took away one of them, and then they took away all 2. And then you have the standard one everyone's familiar with. Then Philadelphia made the Philadelphia flag, which had a black and a brown stripe to represent, Stonewall and a lot of history. And then after that, we got what was called the progressive Pride flag. And that's the flag Vaush is referring to, that has the triangle on the side and has the black and the brown stripe. And then it has inside the triangle is the trans flag. And then outside that is just the generic rainbow modern use flag.
Yeah,
but,
I think that I think eventually we're just going to have to print a color wheel on the flag to really encompass everything we can. It's silly. It is silly that like everything's getting thrown in there, but it's amazing too, Yeah. Because it used to be these groups and political pressures were so isolated. They may have individually believed in the basic tenets of intersectionality, getting along together, recognizing our shared privileges and prejudices, but it's really hard to actually act on that. The internet's made it a lot easier. You were, what was the premise of the original question that you asked? I had a response to that prompt, but.
Well, the original premise was, how do you think that the museum and just education in general can work to help bridge the generational gap? We all come from different generations with different experiences. And what problems from that do you see with intersectionality, like having different terms where queer for one group, I'm sure someone here was at a time when queer was a hard slur,
right? And
now we've kind of reclaimed it as that umbrella term. So just intersectionality.
Yeah, so the internet has made this so much easier. The intergenerational activism. Because it used to be before, people were largely constrained to social circles and activist circles that reflected their age. Because by the time a new generation of, I don't know, college activists came out, they had their own names for everything, their own terms, their own magazines, literature, heroes, idols, and battles. And for that reason, there was a lot of friction, I think. There still is, to an extent. The queer thing, I think, is a very good example of that. I have never in my life heard queer used as an insult outside of the movies my father would sometimes watch. Beyond that, I have only ever heard it used as a positive. Only LGBT people referring to themselves or to other LGBT people in a positive sense. But I've seen the movies of my dad, and I know that back in his generation, or a generation before that, people would have had very different experiences. And if a gay kid growing up in the 50s, you know, doesn't like hearing the word queer because it was used against them back then, I can't really blame them for being sensitive about it. It seems like inevitably queer is going to be recontextualized. That just seems to be the course that we're on, which is probably good, fewer words to hurt people with. Another big intergenerational gap that I see are TERFs. Many TERFs act basically identical to second generation or second wave feminists. They use the same language, they idealize the same writers, but they've twisted the literature and the language into some sort of essentialist critique of men that they then transpose against trans women. If you look at the people they read and the arguments they use, they're very, very fundamentally similar to some of the radical feminist writings back in the 60s. It's just, of course, you know, now we see how that writing pans out over time. I'm fairly critical of the way those ideas manifest today. I mean, J.K. Rowling is a great example. For one, J.K. Rowling is very classically a TERF. Her arguments against trans people are rooted in, I guess, the worst expressions of second wave feminist writings you could find, where all the power dynamics and relations between men and women are reduced to biological essentialism. That is, of course, maintained in the environment with trans people. And trans men are lost lesbians and trans women are predators. And it's all really horrible stuff. But a lot of it is just, that was the theory of the 60s. Today it's 2021. It's been 2 to 3 human generations. It's entirely possible for us to update our writings on this. And the fact that nowadays people of any generation can communicate with one another, I think it makes it a lot easier to do that. At the end of the day, bigotry is derived almost entirely from fear of the unknown. It's really easy to dislike or fear or be disgusted by trans people when you've never met or talked to one. Nowadays, more people, I saw stats on this. I think that nowadays for Generation Z, so people who are 24 or younger, I think, more than half of them have at some point in their lives been friends with a person who is LGBT. I think it was as high as maybe mid-60s%. That number is more than 4 times the number for the baby boomer generation. That's just incredible work done. It's very difficult to maintain bigotry in that environment.
I definitely think J.K. Rowling is an interesting example of doing good while personally doing bad, because those books around the time, like you yourself have said, you've not read those books, you don't like those books, but things like that.
Wait, Harry Potter or the second wave feminist books?
You didn't like Harry Potter, did you? Did you read it?
I did read it, but I don't like.
Okay.
That's my anti-British bias, but yeah, I did.
Some other YouTuber didn't like it. I must have gotten that confused because they hadn't read it, but they read reviews and didn't like it. Either way, things like that and like Percy Jackson served as this big societal boom. It was, you had all these queer kids who didn't have anywhere to go. They weren't accepted into society. They weren't accepted at home. Online hadn't given them this like online, presence where you can talk with people who understand you yet. And these books served as this escape, to the point where a lot of those kids overlooked the bias, to the point where with like Harry Potter, some of the bias didn't come out till later in the book in terms of just bias you saw with Jewish people and transgenders and other people like that. And I just think it was interesting. So to go back to Millie, I actually had a question for you in regards to this as a whole, the question we just asked. Like Marshall had said, you haven't been married, right, Marshall? You don't.
Correct.
Do you intend to?
I have not been married, even though Paul and I have been together 27 years.
So there's like this point in the community where, yes, we want to push for equality all across the board. There are some people who don't care. I want to know your take on the importance of everyone working together, even for things that might not necessarily internally affect them. Just because one of the council members of the museum, she's in a straight passing relationship, and she could get, married, but she and her partner can't. They're basically eternally engaged because they have a disability, and they're like, obviously just societal issues all the way around. And if you stamp one law, it might not necessarily affect the other. So I was wondering if you have any thoughts on that because of your work.
Yes, it takes me back to the days when I owned 3 houses for HIV. And I didn't understand why the state could come in and close me when one of them were already contracted by the city of Phoenix. All of my paperwork, but my fingerprints came back transgendered with a name, but the same social security number. And trans was not discussed in the 70s or 80s. So I believe that I was an scapegoat and my business was forced to close. And a number of the HIV clients that I had to be sent to different homes, and they were not comfortable with. However, I decided that I would become a transgendered advocate. I married my husband. We will be celebrating this April 36 years of marriage. I married him because I was wounded. Now, would I have married my husband today? Had that not? No, I married him to validate me. That way, I went into the school system. And once I went into the school system, I advocated post-op trans. I was free. I worked for Phoenix Access when I first got to Phoenix. That's where I put the doctors together for HIV. That's where I got the idea for opening my home and having Phoenix's first heterosexual that was given contaminated blood when gay men were dying. My brother was an entertainer and also a nurse at Phoenix Baptist Hospital. We had contact with Dr. Cunningham and Dr. Fisher, who are contracted doctors today. So my history not only outed me, it gave me the strength to be my woman and go into the Madison School District and be the first transgendered African-American woman and retire there 20 years later. That's my history. And I'm proud of that because it has opened many doors for a number of girls that did not have the opportunity or the chance. I was given that opportunity and I took the chance. And there's no regrets because there's good things that happen and there are bad things that happen. Sure, my business was closed. I sold those businesses to undocumented Hispanic families. And one of the families called me last year and said, "Are you the Miss Bloodworth that bought me my first Nike shoes?" And I said, "Daisy Stay?" She said, "Yes. I'm going to run in the 2021 Olympics. You're a part of that." That's a blessing. So I have made a difference in many children's lives and never been a mommy, but I have rocked many babies. And that's what I hope my tombstone will say. She was never a mother. Oh, but the baby she's rocked. So I'm proud of that.
Did you say you were working with Dr. Fisher?
Oh, yes. I started with Dr. Fisher.
He was the doctor that started my transition.
Yes, of course. He was the only one at that time. There were many doctors, but they were not contracted during the access days. And there was so much fraud going on. at that time. Mercy Care is the only that is still going today. And I left Mercy Care to open Buffalo House, and they're still going today. So I look at that and say to my history, I hope you get my history right, because I won't be able, but I'll send a boat down if you don't get it right. Boom, boom, boom.
Marshall will get it right for you.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we have for each hall specifically, I know we only have so many leadership teams, but for each hall, we're going to try and get as many like people who can look over it and just make sure everything's absolutely good. But that reminds me, I'm sure since Vaush and I went to university around similar times, you've probably remember this as well if you took any of these classes, but like movies like Paris is Burning around that time when they used to have the group homes. So you're kind of like that, the leader of those homes.
Old school. Yes, I'm old school.
All right. Well, unless anyone else has anything to say on the theory topics, we're going to move into our last few questions, which are all actual physical museum location or like about the museum base. So if everyone's good to go, we'll move on to those last ones and finish up here.
Absolutely. Oh, you know, I took architecture classes in high school. I assume that I'll have the opportunity to have input on its actual design, physically build it, you know?
Given as you were the one who pushed me into all this, I would hope so. That is actually true. But beforehand, I used to be a generic, like, go with the motion, do whatever would work. You know, I was on ROTC track. I grew up in an old style house in Fairfax, basically the capital of the Hunger Games. And, you know, I was just put into the Fox News was the default on our cable box up until I went to university. And then my friend introduced me to Vaush, and he's just like, hey, you're good at talking to people. You should try and actually learn how all this stuff works. And then I got removed from ROTC due to Trump rules. And I was continuing to watching Vaush more and more. And I was talking with some friends who were just like, you know, trying to figure themselves out. Some of them were eggs, some of them were hatchlings, and they weren't quite sure, and they were learning stuff. And I was taking classes and talking with professors, and we went to the Pennsylvania Capitol, and we talked with some more people, and one thing led to another and formed. And then they decided that for some reason they wanted me to speak. I don't know why, but so far it's going well. But the next main question for this has to do with the halls. So as I said before, all the flags will be broken up into various halls. For the most part, some of them will be inside different ones, like, you know, the lesbian hall, we'll talk about labia lesbian and lipstick lesbian and bush lesbian and things like that. The trans hall will have all the different trans flags. And this might have been Millie. Marshall never actually mentioned the name, but someone recently designed a new flag. So I guess we're up to 23 now, but this is another ally flag. So this is our next question. It was a trans ally flag. Because we had the main ally flag, which there was some issue with the community with, because it looks rarely similar to the hate group, the straight flag, because they're both black and white, but it's like, what you're going to do. That was made after the ally flag was made. So the question is, does anyone have any concerns with how we handle ally representation? Because the museum, first and foremost, is education to the community. It's to people who want to learn more about the history, like Dawn, if he was still here, hatchlings at any age, eggs who are still finding themselves. But we also want to have this education to allies. You know, you go to the museum and your friend takes you, and they don't know anything and they're still learning, or your parent, they're more leaning towards that Gamergate hole, but they're interested, they want to learn, they want to care for their kid. So right now, what the council has kind of agreed on is having an actual hall specifically for allyship. We think this would be the best way to go about going things, because you have each hall, which would cover that hall in particular, and then sort of on the ground sub-level floor, you'd have areas like libraries and hope centers. One initiative I've been working on with some universities around my area is these things called closets, which are basically people donate clothes, and trans people or non-binary people or genderqueer people can try on different outfits and jewelries, you know, all the wonderful experience of an in-person mall, but with the safety of online shopping. So there will be that lower section of the museum. Allies can walk through and they can go directly to the ally hall. And I thought that was the safest way. There'll still be overlapping mention. Obviously, you're going to have like overlapping talks of different terms in each hall, but a lot of people felt conflicted, like, why are you giving allies this representation? Because some people don't even think they deserve a flag. And I just want everyone's general thought on that. So I guess we can start with Marshall and move on to Monica, and then Millie, and then Vaush.
Yeah, so I mean, I think when you look at flags, Kendra Tonin basically recently created the trans ally flag because her wife was like, I'm not trans, but I do want to fly a flag to support my wife and the community that surrounds me. And so that was the reason why she went about creating the trans flag. I think when you look at Arizona, we also had Native P flag, which was the only plea flag chapter that really focused on those indigenous communities. Until recently, they couldn't continue leadership. So actually, they are no longer a P flag chapter. I think it's important that there have been allies pre-flag, just in terms of our communities. They were around long before a flag, but that is now a marker, and using that to organize the story, but that there are stories that will exist before that, as well as stories that exist after that. And I think as long as we allow for that continuum of stories throughout those times, that really, for me, is the focus.
All right. And before we move on, just try and highlight the focus a little bit more, because I think we're all in agreement pretty much on what you said with flags in general. Moving towards the topic of just allies, a lot of people are conflicted on whether or not they deserve that level of representation as a marker. I personally, and many of the council personally, think that they deserve that marker because it marks a stronger unification. It marks a stronger time, because before it was just, we wanted to be accepted as the norm. We want to be the more norm. And once one group's accepted, they kind of leave the other ones behind. This group's accepted. And as we saw with Stonewall. So I think having the marker of an ally flag and people who are willing to take up the ally flag overall and can learn the history and learn what it means to be a good ally, because we've all seen those cringy allies. Vaush has talked about them, and we've all experienced them. But I just wanted to get your talk on how we is it appropriate to represent them, and how much representation do you think they deserve? Do you think giving the hall where we can specifically talk and try and keep, because it would be segregating in a little bit too, because some people who may not be comfortable going over into all the museums, or if you're going there and you're a hatchling and you're trans and you're willing to go to the closet and try on clothes and try being yourself, it would be a little bit level of, you can stay away from the ally hall while allies are talked everywhere else. So yeah, Monica, do you have any?
Yes, I do believe that we should give allies pretty much a hall for them. We need a place where everything is the basic terminologies, the basic, what you go in and it says, what is transgender? And what is the term transsexual? What is cross-dresser? What is, these are things that many people who are our allies don't know. And so this would be a hall where it would be educational, terminology, various books that are possibly available, with keep it, the old saying, KISS, keep it simple, whatever the other S you want to put on there. And that's what that should be a simple place. There'll be a lot of allies who are going to need that simplicity. There's not going to be a lot of allies. There might be a bunch of allies that won't need that simplicity. They'll be able to go to the trans room because they have a trans child, and they pretty much done a lot of education themselves. But there's going to be a lot of people in general that are going to be curious on, what is this museum? Maybe we should stop and take a look. Hey, Martha, let's take a look at what's in this LGBTQ flag museum. Maybe we can see stuff. We want to make it so simple in some ways that people like that will be educated without them knowing it, actually, educated without them knowing it.
Right.
There's ways of doing things, like you don't have to put a little thing that says, this is a transgender person. You don't want to have them do a lot of reading. Quick and dirty. Make it simple. Keep it
Right.
simple.
And just a reminder to anyone viewing and on wherever you're watching this, that is going to cause some words that might not have been reclaimed to be used in pure historical context. Like you have transsexual, transgender, transvestite. They all mean something on a fundamentalist term, and that's something people are going to learn. Like one term means trans, my gender's transition, this is what I'm identifying as. Another was just a medical or a broader term for saying post-operation, as if I've had some form, either hormones or I've had full surgery. Like there was different terms for all of those. And because some of them were used as slurs, everyone migrated to using only one term. And so we're going to see some of those terms in the museum just to prep everyone for that concept, as we've already saw with using the word queer.
Well, also screens with a little video going on.
Mm-hmm.
I'm big in video. I do lots of video work. I had all the cameras and everything. I could do whatever you want. I'll put it together. You tell me, okay, here's the script. Put this together, Monica. And then I'll put it together and you can run it on your screen, something simple, animation or
those,
whatever,
the interactive button things. But yeah, we're going to just, for the sake of time, because we have two more questions, we're going to move on. Millie and then Vaush.
Okay.
Well, for me, I was called sex change because the doctors told me you cannot straddle the fence. I've known girlfriends that can pass the physical, but it did not. The brain and that new vagina did not match, and they went to the dark side. So I've seen several sadnesses in my life due to transgender and sex change. I preferred, since I was outed, sex change, because when I worked at Saks Fifth Avenue and I was outed, they forced me to go in and take a physical. And I passed the physical. So, yet they still stated transgender. And I believe until we have a true name for sex and what it entails, because there's a variety in everybody, and some of us like to have gourmet and play with this, that, and the other. And it all deals under sex. When I was a teenager, I read the Kinsey report. I'm okay, you're okay, because I was called crazy. Boy, you want to go and have your dick cut off. Oh, can you imagine being told that and you're a kid or a teenager? Yes, I want to have it done. And I remember the night that I had it done when they shaved me, and I watched him for the last time and said to myself and God, when I wake up, I will have a split. And true enough, when I woke up that next hours or so, my legs were tied to the bed, and I had so much cotton and padding over my vagina, and an IV tube. And I was excited. It was over for me. I had become that impossible woman. And from that day forward, I had said, I am a sex change. I was born with a dick and nuts, and you removed them, but you built me a vagina. I can pass the physical. So I married my husband to validate myself. Look at all of that fear, and I'm still going through that today, but not as much pain, because I'm transparent. I show you the woman I am and live it. And you can say, you can take Miss Miller to the bank. That's the only honesty I know and to have. And since I'm being pushed under that scrutiny, I still get that. Today, 40 some years later, teachers looking at me with disgust and disdain, but that's okay. I'm stronger than that. I have lived a happy life as a woman, not just transgendered, but fish, woman. So, yes, but there are many girls that have not had that opportunity, and the surgery is not for everyone. You have to know your head before you can get what you want on the bottom. I've seen so much sadness. I want the sadness to stop. Thank you for having this and giving me a chance to talk about my history and what it looked like for me. Because back in those days, when you look at it, I was the prototype. They don't even do the same surgery today that they did on me. So, you know, my history and my woman would be considered prehistoric compared to today. But I'm blessed because I have lived it. Thank you so much, and God bless you all.
That's definitely, I like that ending part there, just about the differences and as we develop. And that's something I've talked with some people, and Vaush and I might clash on this a little bit because I identify as bisexual, he identifies as pansexual. To us, we basically have the same definition, but those terms on their boiled down self mean two different things. Bisexual still exists on the binary, pansexual doesn't. And that's a conflict that you see all the time amongst the community, where you have, what was it called? It was the orange and black with the SS. It was super gay or super straight or something that came out.
No. Yeah.
That whole mess, we don't deal with that. But those are terms we're gonna have to use because everyone develops in different areas. As we talked with the Philippines that haven't developed or developed. I've heard some professors talk to me about how pansexual developed, and at the time bisexual should have gone out of practice, but because they didn't have some of the flags in the area where a lot of the prominent bisexual activism was, they didn't develop into the pansexual. And once those other flags and those other activists of transgender or non-binary started going to those areas, the bisexual activists just roped it into their term, and now you have these two terms coexisting. I see Vaush scribbling down a lot there. I know you have a great idea, so we're going to go to you next with this question. And unless you say what I think you're going to say, I do have a special question that I wrote for you specifically based on what she said.
Well, one of the things I was going to say is that I'm afraid I'm actually going to have to depart soon. So this might be my final contribution in this block. But so to a number of points here. First and foremost, at this point, my position on the bi-pan discourse is this. I do not care. Whatever term people want to use, whatever makes them happy. There's probably no benefit to be had from parsing out the semantics on that. I actually do have a slightly more contentious opinion with regards to the ally wing and the ally flag and stuff. Now, this is just my opinion. I know people are going to have different experiences. But when we talk about the trans flag or the gay flag, we're talking about two different and overlapping things that sometimes mean different amounts in different proportions to different people. When a person flies a trans flag, are they saying they are trans, or are they saying they support trans people? Now, I'm not trans. I've flown the trans flag. When I do it, I'm saying that I support trans people. I don't think anyone has ever come up to me assuming I'm trans because I had a backpack pin or a little flag on me that had the trans flag. I think that what that means to people, whether they would prefer the flag to represent an identity or an idea, is very much a personal matter. But I will say this much. This sounds a little bit strange, but hold with me here. When I went to college, there were plenty of people who were not gay, lesbian, bi, or trans, but they were culturally those things. Culturally LGBT. And what I mean by that is, even though they personally were cisgender and heterosexual, the mannerisms that they had adopted, their ideologies, their political positions, were in line with the LGBT community. And you would have to ask. I mean, you could look at them and you maybe a presumptuous person could look and say, oh, you must be gay. Well, no, actually, they just got along really well with gay people. And one of the reasons why I really liked that was because it broke heterosexuality and cisnormativity as the defaults. Now that wasn't the default. In these communities, you have no idea. If you go to a college party in the right part of the world, you have no idea at all what the people there identify. It's completely alien to you. You can go to a frat party in Georgia, and you can know. I mean, you can know the signifiers are there from people's behavior, the language they use. You feel these people are mostly straight. These people are mostly cisgender, maybe entirely so. But in some communities, you cannot tell. And I really like that. But that thing that I just described is most enabled by the belief that the flag represents an idea, not an identity. It further blurs the lines. A trans flag worn on a person's backpack or a pin on their shirt doesn't identify their personal demographic characteristics. It identifies their political beliefs, which in my mind is actually much more telling of a person. But again, this could be my bias. I think that an ally wing in the museum is a fantastic idea because whether we like it or not, you know, plenty of good progressive work has been and must be enabled by people who are not a part of the communities that they are explicitly fighting for. No one man is an island, etc., of course. I like the idea of an ally wing. Allyship flags, I don't necessarily have an issue with those either. I think they can be nice. I'm not trans again. Maybe I would think if there was a trans flag and a trans ally flag, which would I rather see hanging outside of a college dorm? The trans ally flag, I mean, they both signal the same idea, that trans people are valid, but one of them says, I think trans people are valid, but I am not of them. And maybe there's something, well, not exclusionary necessarily there. Maybe there's something more ostracizing. If there's anything that I would suggest very strongly, it's some kind of message in the LGBTQ museum. Something like, we have split these wings, not because these movements are separate, but because explaining their development within the confines of a building limits us in many ways. In reality, all of these movements, the gay, lesbian, trans, pan, bi, whatever, overlap and intersect in myriad ways, and their struggle is a collective struggle. So remember, as you proceed through this wing or another, that you're seeing only a slice of a greater whole, not separate ideas enclosed within the same building, but the same idea fractured because of buildings being physical spaces that have to be designed as such. I think as long as that idea is being communicated, I'm very much on board with whatever follows from that point.
Well, I think we can skip the last question then, because the last question pretty much was there were some people saying, oh, future of museums is online, you should move to an online stuff. And I was going to just get everyone's take, but you and Monica pretty much have described the entire internals of the museum and everything. One of the designs was on the entrance. The first internal of the museum next to like your help desk would be on one side that says this is what's going on in the world, and the other side which says this is what's going on in that area, and then the explanation in the hall going in. Before Vaush, before you go, I just had one question for you.
Yes.
So this goes off what Millie had said. This is something you've talked about a lot, and this is something I personally believe might be a future progression, gender abolitionism. There's been multiple just different definitions of this that I've seen. And to me, what this means ultimately is outside of some jobs, like let's say movies or some sports and medical, gender doesn't really have a term. We can talk to people, we can say names, we can ask them what their pronouns are. In the museum, we're going to have, the little, you can write your name and your pronouns. Mm-hmm. But because you just have so many different people, especially in the trans community, like what does it mean to truly transition? This future, from my understanding, and I wanted you to give your definition, correct me if I'm wrong, gender abolitionism would be like changing society so it doesn't exist. You go to the store and you have shoes and you go to running, basketball, whatever sport, and then you go to your size, 1 to 5, 5 to 14. Obviously, if you really needed to, for the sake of smaller, shorter people, you could have that. You have your underwear sections, which just have, what do you have? And you go to that section. You have jeans in general with different styles, different cuts and shirts. That was just my baseline understanding. It's removing it from society. And this is something we want to talk about more in the museum as we get closer to the bottom level of just gender and societal interaction. So I was wondering if you could enlighten us a little bit more on your take.
Yeah. I think that this concept is best illustrated by the Germans. You know, back before the existence of the modern German state, that portion of the world was occupied by many dozens of disparate and sometimes very, very aggressive barbarian tribes, or at least that's what they were called, of course. They were called that by the Romans. And these German tribes, you could speak to them, you could speak to the Mongolian tribes who were united by the Genghis Khan. These tribes had very refined and distinct senses of tribal identity and of antagonism towards those of different identities. But today there is one Germany. In the span of just a few hundred years, dozens of different and extremely important distinctions melted away into something that I think we'll agree today is perhaps a little bit more relevant. Now, what happened there? They were unified, and there was, of course, conquest and bloodshed, and that's not good. I'm not speaking positively to that. What I'm speaking positively towards is the idea that at times there were ideas which are relevant and very, very socially important that fade in importance with time. The idea that perhaps in 3 or 4 or 500 years, people are no longer taught that because of the genitals they are born with, that they must be certain things. Because when we speak of gender, we're speaking predominantly of gender roles. The idea, why does one group wear dresses? Why does the other group wear jeans? Well, there's nothing biological about it. Maybe you say the dresses have narrower shoulders, but that we chose to do that. If we wanted to, we could have it that all the people assigned male at birth are running around in dresses, and vice versa with jeans and suits and what have you.
Again, you're talking
It's completely arbitrary. And the arbitrariety is sometimes damaging. The idea that women should be better at housekeeping or that they should be better at so on and so forth, that can be harmful to them. It can be harmful to men because sometimes men will take their little daughters out to the park to play with them and they'll be assumed to be some sort of predator because, oh, women take care of the children, not men. What are you doing? These assumptions, they hurt both ways. Nobody benefits from them, really. But people still care very much about their gender. I care about mine. I like being a guy. I like looking the way I do and talking the way that I do. And I'll probably stay this way until I die. But what about my child? And the child of theirs? And so on and so on. Maybe 10 generations down the line, it's not so much that we're forcing them to not care about gender. They just don't care about it as much. We're already seeing this process in effect. 50 years ago, the idea of men wearing ear jewelry was very deviant. Nowadays, it's almost common, for younger people at least, in most parts of America, I would say. With time, things are going to broaden in this respect. And while gender abolitionism will always be a sort of half-formed, long-term project, in the long run, I think everyone here can agree that too much weight is placed on expectations and roles based on what types of bodies people are born with. And that the more we do away with that, the freer people can live their lives. Now, for sex, obviously we'll always have sex differences, but we can address those in ways that are non-coercive, can we not? I mean, there's no reason to believe that just because some people are born with X bits or Y bits, that we couldn't resolve anything having to do with that without invoking the dreaded gender rules. I think that we could do that just fine. And in fact, we already do in some cases. There are communities, I think, in Sweden, where they raise their children gender neutral. It's all they, thems, or whatever the Swedish equivalent is, you know. And of course, these children, they're born, I mean, we would call it assigned male or assigned female at birth. And I'm sure they're given provisions, which respect. My chat is saying hen is the name they use for they, them, the Swedish name. And I'm sure that they can accommodate whatever those biological expectations or needs are perfectly fine without relying on gender roles. That would be a component of gender abolition. But as long as gender means something to people, they should be able to practice it and live it as freely as they would like. Nothing coercive, only a shift in broader social standards. Sorry, that was extremely long-winded. I apologize.
Hey, no, you're fine. It was a better definition than that's what I was looking for. But you know, we've unfortunately, because I know Vaush, you're very busy, we've reached the end of our questionnaire. And you know, just to let the chat know, Vaush's chat and other chats, this is a project to build a building it's going to be located in Northern Virginia, outside DC area, not in the city, just for societal and safety concerns. You can find us on Facebook. I've tagged Vaush's Facebook and letting him know we're going to be here today. So Vaush, if you want to share that, you can find it through that.
Of course.
We're setting up a Discord. The Discord and the website are still in the works. we had a bit of trouble with the turf, so the website needs to be repaired. So that's going to be due to COVID, website's going to be a few more weeks, unfortunately. Discord should be up in a week or two. All that will be posted on the Facebook page. And in the future, there'll be more of these streams talking about gender abolition, intersectionality, because that's now becoming a recognized third gender, and just other aspects of the museum.
I just want to say I really appreciate you having me here, and it was delightful to meet all of you. Thank you. My community was watching this, several thousand people, and they spoke positively of all of you. I'm really looking forward to seeing this project develop.
All right, well, thank you, and we'll be sure to touch base with you more as we do.
I'll speak to all of you again. Take care.
All right, have fun, Vaush.